Hello and welcome to my channel. My name's Helen and I talk about all things art, crafting and general creativity. Today I'm going to be talking you through the 5 stages of art journaling and talk a little bit about the struggle that a lot of us go through when we do an art journaling page, especially if we're not very confident in our art journaling skills. Now, art journaling is obviously a very individual process, so I'm not suggesting that this is going to be the same for everyone. But based on the comments that I see on my own channel and those of other people who run channels on YouTube, I often read the comments on videos and they're very enlightening. I think that these tend to be stages in the process that either we see all of them or we see some of them. It's not to say you're doing it wrong if you don't see them, but I just think these tend to be quite common things that happen when we create an art journal page. And I want to talk through how I push through them and how I have pushed through them in this particular composition. It doesn't really matter if you are a complete beginner or if you're like me and you've been doing it a couple of years, or if you're an absolute pro. I think that some of these struggles come to all of us at different times, and it's good to talk about them and just discuss the challenges we all face, which you're welcome to talk about in the comments, especially if you've got some that haven't come up in the video as I speak about them, and also how we might move through those challenges in order to create a spread that we are happy with. So the first thing to say is that the journal that I'm working in is deliberately scrappy, and I made an unintimidating art journal for myself so that I wouldn't be put off doing art by thinking I didn't want to ruin a perfect sketchbook. You can see the process of making that journal in a video I'll link to below. But now let's get straight on to the 5 stages of art journaling. And the first one is facing the blank page, which I think is something that almost everyone finds a little bit of a struggle. I have moved past that in this particular composition by already scribbling on the page, just with a felt tip pen, to create a little pattern. And at the end of this journaling process, you can't even see what I've scribbled, really. It's very, very faint. But it just helps me come to this page and feel like I'm not, damaging a perfect white sheet with my messy, imperfect marks. It just gets me past the idea that I'm just going to immediately ruin the page. And so I do recommend scribbling anything down on the page at all, even writing something that you never want to tell anyone. That's a really good one. And then you're going to paint and stick and glue all over it so nobody can ever read your thoughts and feelings. It's a great way of getting some things out of your system and also getting rid of that blank page. So facing the blank page, I think, is the first stage. And any way you can find to get past that is wonderful. Please put your suggestions in the comments below. But I found one of the most helpful things is simply to scribble all over the page in any colour. If you already know what your colour scheme is going to be, then you're halfway there. Just scribble all over the page in that colour. If you don't, then you can use black or, a grey, because that's unlikely to clash with anything you're going to put on the page. The second stage is building a background and going in search of intuition. And by that I mean building up layers on your page that will serve as a background to your composition, at the same time trying to be intuitive about the process, trying to lean into the way it feels to put certain materials or certain colours and shapes down on the page without overthinking it. I did this in this particular composition by getting some of my woody pencils. They're a type of pencil crayon and they are water soluble. You can dip them in water and make them more vivid. And I just got a couple of colours, orange, purple and black, and just started drawing lines, as you can see, across the page. And I did a sort of circular pattern on the right hand side. And that was my way of sort of starting to lean into my intuition and just get something down on the page. What did it feel good to do today? And that's something that I try and just lean into rather than overthinking, well, does that mark look good? Does it look perfect? If I do that, I'll never finish a composition, and I would argue probably neither will you. So it's good to just not overthink. And hey, if you put a perfect mark down, that's wonderful. If you put an imperfect mark down, well, there's always ways of covering it up. So my suggestion to you would just be to try and lean into that intuition as much as you can. Just make the marks that feel good and freeing on the page. And then you can decide afterwards what you're going to cover up and perhaps what you're going to keep. There's always ways of covering things over in art journaling, and that's something to remember. Now, I would say personally, I hop back to stage 2 several times in the space of any given composition. Maybe you're not like that. Maybe you build a background and texture and then you move on to the focal points and that's the last thing you do on the background. I am constantly hopping back to stage 2 and finessing it and rethinking it, because that's just the way my brain works. So you'll see that at several points in this video that it seems as though I'm moving on to focal points when actually I then hop back to creating more texture in the background, which is actually what I'm doing now. For those of you who have a more linear thought process than me, stage 3 is auditioning your first focal points and creating balance on the page. So I'll talk a little bit about what I mean by both those things. So the focal points in this are probably fairly obvious. I've got the lady who's sitting sort of at the bottom there. And then I've got a couple of little text pieces that have slightly bigger typography. One talks about control destiny. The other talks about love money. They're both cut out of magazines. They weren't expensive. So they're my focal points. And what I'm trying to do around those focal points is create balance on the page. So you may notice that I've got some blue circles going across the top and then going down the side. And then I've got an orange circle in the left side and an orange circle down at the right bottom side. And I've got some pink going across the top and some pink going down the bottom. So whatever I do on the page, I'm trying to mirror it at some place other on the page. That's just the way I work. You'll find other ways to create balance and symmetry in your compositions, but I think that tends to be stage 3 of the art journaling process for a lot of people, is they're looking for their focal points and they're looking to create balance in their composition around those focal points. Even when I'm creating more background texture as I am now, you'll notice that I'm putting colour in one place and then looking about where I should put it in another part of the page to balance it out and to create some symmetry. So that's something to bear in mind for stage 3. And you can spend as long as you want on any of these stages. It's not like I'm saying also that you have to do them in this order. It just tends to be the logical process that I see people following in YouTube videos, and it certainly plays a part in my own process as an art journaler. As well as thinking about creating symmetry in your composition with colours, it's good also to think about creating symmetry with shapes. So you can see that I have got circles in the bottom left hand corner and in the right hand corner up at the top there, at the top of the page and at the bottom of the page. So thinking about colour, thinking about shape when we're thinking about balance and symmetry. Now, what I'm doing right now might horrify some of you. I've done all that work and then I've got my gesso out and I seem to be covering over most of it. And you might think, well, what on earth was the point of her putting all those marks down, thinking carefully about where she's gluing all those pieces down, and then she's just putting gesso all over it, knocking it into the background. You can barely see it. When it's dry, you can see more of it. But I must admit that I am one of those people who often likes to create a complex background texture and then knock it back with a bit of gesso. And you can see now in the video that it's dried. It's not been knocked back that much. It's still visible, that texture. It's just been muted down a little bit. I like to do that because I like there to be background complexity in my compositions. If you like a very clean background, then you're probably not going to do anywhere near as much work on the background as I have, and you're probably not going to be getting the gesso out and cover over half your work. That's just something that I do, and it's a little bit of a side note to the 5 stages. It's that hopping back again to stage 2 that I was talking about, where you're building the layers in your background, you're building up the texture. Now, stage 4 in art journaling process tends to be a moment of discovery. I've put it at stage 4 in this video because that's where it popped up in this composition. That's not going to be necessarily the case for you. Discovery might happen in stage 1. And if it does, you're so much luckier than I am most of the time, I have to tell you right now. Usually stage 4 only literally happens for me later in the process. I discover something about the composition that pulls it all together. In this case, it's those black painted lines across the composition that for me started to maneuver this piece towards the finish line. There was a black marker made with my woody pencil right at the beginning in black. You might remember that I did a sort of circular pattern along that right hand edge. And when I'd put the gesso on, I noticed that I really liked the way the black line stood out against the muted background. So then I thought, well, that's interesting. I'm going to see if I can do some heavier black lines across the page and essentially make it look as though the woman is behind a sort of lead glass window looking out. And once I'd got that, I'd sort of started to build a narrative in my head about this woman, what was happening to her, what she was doing, what she was thinking. And I suddenly saw this woman trapped in a world of her abstract thoughts behind this window. It's made me curious about using big, thick black lines like this in future compositions in order to give a sense of a barrier between the viewer and the subject, whoever that subject or whatever that subject might be. Your discovery will be very different to mine because you're an individual doing your own art piece. It might be about shape, it might be about colour, it might be about subject matter. Whatever it is, it will reflect you and your individual approach to art. The fifth stage of art journaling is what I like to call, is it finished yet? It's where you look at the piece and you start to wonder, is there anything else that I could add? Is there anything else that I could finesse? Is there anything else that I could do? And you can see me here putting final pieces down to balance out the composition, the 3 circles in the left-hand corner, the 3 circles in the right-hand corner, going around the lady to make sure that she stands out from the background. And I also get some creative Sharpie markers to go over the black and white lines that I've created just to make them a lot smoother than they usually are if I just use paint. So I decided to go over the black lines a little bit and also over the white sections. You can see that I'm auditioning this little piece of paper with kind of handwriting on it. I know that I want to put handwriting somewhere on this particular piece because I want it to vary against the text that's printed. So I want to create more variation, and I know that I want to do that, but I can't figure out where. I do figure out where at the end. I add a postage stamp to contrast with the circles. I wanted something rectangular. So that creates contrast as well. So it's thinking about shape and thinking about colour. How can I create more contrast? As I said earlier, I'm going around the black and white lines with this creative Sharpie marker and just making sure that everything's looking a lot smoother than it would with just paint. I wanted to go over the white sections that I gessoed so that they stood out even more in contrast to the pieces that I had not gessoed, where a lot of the chaos is still very visible in this woman's mind, and it's sort of represented by all the different shapes and words and colours behind those imaginary lead-paned windows that I've created. Eventually, I did realise that the perfect place to put some handwriting, something to contrast with the printed text, was in the big blocks of black on the page. And I just did some pretend writing, just made something up in my head and just really scrappily wrote it across the page. It was all about being set free, because I imagine this woman in a kind of prison of her own mind. And I love the way that the image that I've selected, the lady's expression, it just doesn't give anything away. And yet all of the chaos around her probably speaks volumes to her thoughts and all the chaos that's going on in her mind. I really hope you've enjoyed this video and that it helps you think about the different stages we go through when we create an art journal composition. I would love to hear some comments down below about what your process is. And I really hope that this helps you work through some of the challenges that we all face when we're doing art journaling. There'll be another video about creativity soon. Until then, take care and I'll see you next time.